Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be scientifically, artistically, and commercially inclined. We look at them and see how they affect our economy in Zimbabwe. My name is John Masogo. Today, we would like to look at risk management and how it affects our lives. In particular, here in Zimbabwe, we look at the ease of doing business. Are we risk averse? How are we able to manage our business? Risk management is often defined as the continuing process to identify, analyze, evaluate, and treat loss exposures and monitor risk, control, and financial resources to mitigate the adverse effects of loss. And today we are delighted to host Dr. Farai Musamba, who is a risk management expert, who is going to be telling us about how we can avoid risk as businesses, as entrepreneurs, and so forth. Dr. Musamba, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you.
When we're looking especially at the ease of doing business, there are so many organizations that would like to come to Zimbabwe, and they look at whether our amount of risk is such that it's very difficult to do business. What is it that you can highlight as the things that they look at before they actually say, yes, I think the amount of risk that is there, we can do, we can manage it and continue with business?
There are a number of things that someone wanting to do business in Zimbabwe looks at. The primary thing that one would look at as a starting point is how easily is he or she able to register a company so that he can begin to operate in this country. Then after doing that, the next thing that the person looks at is how easy is it to be able to operate bank accounts in this country, to be able to obtain electrical connections, to be able to get licenses from the local authorities or the authorities that give licenses, like City of Farai, for example, City of Bulawayo, and the like. Is there going to be water for the business to be able to run? The currency that we have, is it volatile or is it stable? Those are the things that somebody will look at and say, am I going to be able to do business in this country and be able to survive? So the whole system, the whole economic system is then considered, and then all these are the things that the person or the individual or investor will look at and determine whether it is worthwhile or not worthwhile.
Most of the issues that you raise, Dr. Musamba, are issues that have been raised at different fora, especially the regional consultations that we've had, where government is actually assured that it has improved, especially on the ease of doing business, and also formed some organizations that assist those who are coming from outside to open their businesses as quickly as they can. While we list some of the challenges, which ones would you say we've gone a long way in addressing?
I think the main thing that one must be able to recognize that there has been an improvement. I think some time ago when the records were, some comparisons were made, we were about 155 in terms of the ease of doing business. We have gone up to about 140 now. That means there has been an improvement in terms of where we are now. And one of the things that have been addressed has been at the port of call in terms of the company's office. There's been some major improvements in terms of how one can be able to operate or open a company in this country. There's also been some improvement with the City of Harare in terms of getting shop licenses and things like that. Issues like availability of electricity, I think it's an ongoing program where I think we have seen some improvement in terms of availability of electricity in the past few months. Yes, in a few days, the past few weeks, things haven't been as good as they should be, but I think in the long term, it looks like there is some improvement.
And risk does not only apply to financial situations, it also applies to structural situations whereby you have to plan for what might happen in the future. For example, in our national strategic plan, the nation is urged to actually budget, for disasters and other, factors that might affect the country. Now, say something about that, especially with reference to some of the disasters that we faced, and even right now we're talking of shortage of rainfall. Government needs to budget and plan for what to do next.
Risk is really the probability of an undesirable occurrence from which will prevent us meeting the objectives that we have set out to meet. So, as we set out in any forum or in any business that we try to do, we will find out that there are things that might not happen in the manner that we thought they would happen. So we need to come up with measures that kind of mitigate those risks. And those are the things that will be able to reduce the impact of the risks that we are going to talk about. We are all aware that there is the NDS-1 and then there's Vision 2030 and so on. These visions, we have specific objectives that we intend to meet with these objectives. And these objectives entail us meeting certain requirements or certain deliverables. However, these deliverables may be affected by things that either we do ourselves or things that actually happen by nature. Things like the climate change are things that we may not be able to control. We may not be able to control the climate, but of course we can come up with mitigatory measures. But there are other things that we can control, and those things that we can control are the things that we should try and address. But even then, things like climate measures, we should still be able to find ways to mitigate the risks that come from the lack of rainfall, for example.
That's Dr. Farai Musamba, who is our guest today. We are discussing risk management, but also infusing with how managing that risk can also help with our ease of doing business in Zimbabwe. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum. In the last segment, we did discuss about climate change and what mitigatory measures can be taken. And Dr. Farai Musamba here, who is our guest, was now going into that those are some of the things that might happen and you have to respond to them. Now, how do you respond to some of these things when, in fact, there could be new phenomena?
They may appear to be new phenomena, but we all know that this is a result of change. Yes, we are focusing on climate change, but one of the things that we all know is that change is permanent, and we must plan around it because we know things are going to change. In terms of the climate, we know that there is going to be a phenomenon, there is going to be droughts, there are going to be floods, there are going to be cyclones, and so on. All these things are going to be there. And what we need to do is to plan accordingly to ensure that when these things happen, we are ready. One of the things that we must do in terms of risk management is to move away from a situation where we work on crisis management and really look at managing the activities as they come. Now, you cannot move from crisis management to risk management if you haven't done any planning. For a start, you will need to identify the risks that you are likely to face so that you can prepare for them. In as far as we were talking about in terms of the drought, we were saying, oh yes, we're going to have a drought. So what does it entail? It means there's going to be a shortage of water. And then we're going to say, how are we going to solve the problem in terms of water? Are we going to supply water? We're going to build dams? We're going to have irrigation schemes? We're going to come up with drought-tolerant or resistant seeds or crops, perhaps the crops that are thrive in drought situations and things like that. Those are the things that we would need to measure. And then also come up with measures to save the water, the precious water that is available.
Yes. Then your advice there, while you are still there, your advice to some of these early warning systems that we get and tend to ignore, how should we take them?
One of the major issues regarding risk management is about compliance. And compliance is about you complying with, one, the regulations that are generally out there, and also taking proactive measures to identify things that can go wrong, and then put in place the control systems that will enable you to operate in that environment, and then stick to the control systems that you put in place. The major issue there is we must be able to work through and implement the positions that we have taken to mitigate the risks. The challenges we normally face are that people know what they should do, but they do not go on to implement what they have planned. That is where we kind of miss the game there.
Viewers might think that risk management is only about government and corporates, but even at a personal level, Dr. Musamba, we have to manage risk. In the past, almost every worker would take insurance very easily, but nowadays it's very expensive. Now, how do you, at an individual level, actually manage your risk in life?
Risk mitigation sometimes is about transferring the risk to somebody else. So you know that this thing is likely to happen. So when you plan, you realize that I have no capacity. I'm still going to have a funeral. Yes, when you die, you're still going to have a funeral. But the cost is going to be met by somebody, either by yourself or by somebody else. And you know that you don't have the capacity. So that's why you then go out there and come up with an insurance policy to try and transfer it to another individual. Or you decide, I'm going to put money elsewhere. People would put money in the bank to try and mitigate their risk when there's a shortage of money in the house and so on. So risk is about everyday life, and it applies to everybody, at home or at work. For example, the mere effect of you traveling from home to work, it's a risky exercise because you may not get to work. Something can actually happen on the road. And all those things need to be planned for. You need to be aware that anything can happen. And if anything happens, what is it that you're going to do to reduce the cost to yourselves?
Yes. What I would also want to, you to suggest, as a risk management expert is now that some of these things are now dollarized and they are beyond the reach of many. Yes, they can afford the funeral assurances, but when it comes to life insurance, it's very difficult. Is there a way government and others can actually come up with something together with individuals so that the payments are much lower and people can afford and insure against any risk?
Government can only bring in a good enabling environment that allows private players to engage in risk mitigatory exercises. And when government comes up, if the environment is okay, then various companies or various players can come in. Various players can come in to help people to mitigate risks. Agreed, the cost of taking insurance policies and so on is quite high, but so is the cost of not doing anything about it. So it is important that, yes, we know our earnings are not that much, but out of that, a certain percentage should be put aside to try and cover for that event which we know is going to happen.
Well, from what you are saying, Dr. Musamba, it's very important that one plans for one's life and also is prepared for any eventualities. And even in budgeting for the little that you have got, you also want to budget for risk. That's Dr. Farai Musamba, who is a risk management expert. He is talking to us about risk management at government level, at corporate level, as well as at individual level. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. Today we are discussing risk management, and we welcome you to the third and final segment of Economic Forum. And in this segment, we would like to look at the process itself of managing risk, and also the responsibility that you have in managing risk, as well as the consequences of not actually managing your risk or planning for your risk. And our guest here is Dr. Farai Musamba. Dr. Musamba, the process itself, what is it that you have to go through to be satisfied that I think I've tried my best to plan for risk?
The process entails you to sitting down and identifying the various risks that will affect you, either as a business or as a family or as a government. Once you identify these, you then also sit down and analyze or evaluate the possible impact of each of those risks. So you'll say, these are what is the impact of this, and how frequently is it going to happen, and how is it existential? Are you going to suffer terribly if something goes wrong or not? Because there are big risks and small risks. Then you will, after doing that, after analyzing that, the next thing now is to say to yourself, which risks do I take on? Do I take on everything, or do I simply say, I'm not going to do A, B, C, D, because it's too risky, because that's termination? Or you then say, okay, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, but I must take measures to mitigate or reduce the impact of any risk that will come through. Or we are going to say, okay, I'm going to transfer this risk to somebody else. This is where the insurances come in and so on. You are simply trying to transfer the risk from yourself to somebody else. Those are the things that you will do. And then once you have done that, you then zero down to, how am I going to now reduce the impact of each of the risks that you've identified? You then say, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is that you're going to do to try and mitigate or reduce the risks that you're going to suffer. And once you've done that, you have come up with a matrix that says to you, for all this risk, I'm going to do that, this risk, I'm going to do that, and so on. And then the next thing is, okay, now we have planned. What next is left? Which is where we normally have a problem. The next part now is the implementation of what you have said you are going to do. This is where we normally find ourselves in difficulties, because we rarely implement what we have planned to do.
Dr. Musamba, people do plan, for risk, but at times when they've taken the insurances and other forms of protection, and unknowing or unexpectedly they leave their jobs, maybe while they're in the process of getting to another one, they are not assisted when they have problems because of certain clauses that are in some of these insurances. How can that be mitigated?
It's true that sometimes people plan for the possibilities of things going out of hand by taking insurances or insurance policies, participating in pension schemes, national social security that we are talking about from NASA and so on. But sometimes we have an issue where when it comes to the time when these people who have contributed, who have made their contributions, are now requiring the services of their risk mitigatory processes, they realize that the guy who was sitting on the other end is not forthcoming with the relief that he or she would have been expected to come up with. What I think has happened is that the government put in an enabling environment, because everything comes from the government. They put in an enabling environment and formed the IPEC, the body that regulates the insurance industry. You will notice that sometimes some of the insurance issues or things that happen in this country may not necessarily be in line with what happens elsewhere. Sometimes even for funeral policies and so on, you might find that people contributing for insurance policies in South Africa might actually get a better deal than in Zimbabwe. But that one becomes the role of IPEC, to be able to interrogate the clauses on the systems or the rules of the insurance companies to make sure that the rules do not result in those pensioners or insurance policy holders being shortchanged when the need arises. If people are aware that their needs are going to be catered for, we are going to find that people will also be willingly be able to take insurance policies, take pensions and so on. Unlike now, if you ask many people if they had a choice, they wouldn't actually take insurance policies because some of them have been shortchanged and they've seen people being shortchanged. But people taking insurance policies is also very good for the economy because it provides the savings that people can then be able to access to develop the country and to develop the companies and so on.
Now to conclude, Dr. Musamba, the consequences of not managing risk properly, the consequences of, for example, even living beyond your means and so forth, what are they?
The consequences are what we see every day. When you live beyond your means, it means you may not be able to continue to live in that, or you can actually go right down to the floor because you have spent all your resources living beyond your means. If it is an organization or company, what it does is that it eventually will probably fold because they no longer have the resources to be able to continue. They have spent most of their funds spending on things that were really not necessary. They just wanted to be seen that they are doing well and so on. So it is important though that when we talk about risk management, we are talking about individuals and organizations being able to live within their means and making sure that they have taken sufficient measures to ensure that they can continue to live for the foreseeable future.
Well, Dr. Farai Musamba, we'd like to thank you very much for coming on to Economic Forum, where we discuss various issues to do with risk management, and also we managed to talk about the ease of doing business in that context of managing risk, where others are coming from outside, and if they find us with our own risks, they want to know whether they're going to survive. Viewers, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. If you'd like to engage with us on issues such as what we've been discussing here, risk management, insurances, and so forth, you can do so on the social media platforms that again are showing on your screen. In case you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually view them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of our guest, Dr. Farai Musamba, who is a risk management expert, and the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.